everyone, and welcome to the National Leaders Conference Preparation webinar presentation. We're glad you are able to join us. We have just a few things to announce. That this presentation will last about 35 minutes. We'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions in the box provided on the screen. At the end of the presentation and possibly beforehand, as we see questions come in, we will go ahead and take some breaks to answer them. We are extremely pleased to have all of you here at the end of February. It's an exciting time in Washington. We have a lot of activity surrounding principals, and we're gearing up to arm you with the right materials and information as you speak with your members of Congress. So just a few tips as you get ready to schedule your meetings with members of Congress. We have a few notes. Try to schedule at least 3 meetings. We're happy to help you as you're reaching out to offices and connecting with schedulers and other staffers who may be coordinating the members' calendars. Note that in many cases you may be asked to meet with the legislative assistant, which is, in our experience, sometimes more helpful than meeting with the member of Congress. So we encourage you to take those meetings, even with staff. Oftentimes members of Congress will poke their heads in the meeting and say hello. So after the meetings, as you're scheduling meetings, we're going to ask you to go ahead and fill out the congressional form that we have online. I'll ask Emily to make any comments about that page.
There's a link that's provided on the bottom of this, but that can be found on the NLC webpage that you can access on NAESP's website. It's pretty self-explanatory, but as soon as you make those appointments, if you could let us know when those meetings are, it's pretty helpful to, for us as we plan the conference.
So as you get ready to come to Washington, we're going to provide a little bit of an update right now about the environment in D.C. and a little bit of politics and policy. Right now we've just begun a new session, the 113th Congress, and we have over 92 new members between the House and the Senate. And actually we think the number might be a little bit higher than that if you include the Senate. The political landscape right now is actually a lot more bipartisan than it has been in previous Congresses. Although we have a lot of issues that are outstanding, I think there's a little bit of comity between members of Congress and senators going forward and realizing that we have they have a lot of hard work ahead of them and are getting to the point where they know they have to buckle down. The ESEA reauthorization continues to be expired and in need of significant work. This process has been convoluted and a little bit complicated in light of the administration's waiver package that was offered to states about a little over 2 years ago now, in light of the fact that Congress was unable to complete a full reauthorization. Again, we have a lot of budget issues that are outstanding. It just so happens that when all of you will be here for the National Leaders Conference, many of the budget issues will come to fruition. So we're going to be talking about those a little bit more, and we'll be providing talking points and supportive materials. So again, a few issues that we've just discussed. We have 92 new members of Congress. The committee chairman in the Senate, Senator Harkin, remains. He has a new ranking member, Senator Alexander of Tennessee. You couldn't find 2 more polar opposite members, but interestingly, they are both committed to considering the reauthorization of ESEA. We expect them to come at it with the 2 completely different approaches, but we do know that they're committed to working on the bill. The deficit reduction continues to be important to Congress, and many of the members are working to figure out the right approach, and we'll be arming you with a little bit more information as we go along here today. So we mentioned that the ESEA reauthorization was complicated by the administration's package of waivers offering flexibility from several regulations contained in No Child Left Behind, which is the latest iteration of the ESEA reauthorization. NAESP feels that instead of pitting states against one another, that ESEA should be a national reauthorization to ensure equity for all students. We do believe that even though we haven't had a final bill produced and the two chambers have not been able to come to agreement, the work that the committees have done, really when you look at the two bills, or actually a host of bills that have surfaced between the House and Senate, they're not that far apart. We think that given this new Congress and perhaps a little more political will, there's a real light at the end of the tunnel, and members have an opportunity to pick up where they left off and come to a consensus agreement. Going forward this year in the new Congress, as we consider different ways to approach ESEA, NAESP is pushing aggressively that the Congress turn ESEA to build the capacity of educators, namely and chiefly principals. There are several different points here that we're going to be underscoring through our policy proposals, including removing the punitive accountability system that we really believe just slices and dices student test score data to place labels on schools and students. We think there's a better way that the federal accountability system can be directed, especially in light of the states and the waiver package, which are moving into the direction of growth and achievement with some concerns. And we're going to take those concerns to Congress as they consider how to construct the new ESEA reauthorization efforts. We think that providing professional development is, of course, of utmost importance, and knowing that only 3% of $2.5 billion is really directed to sustained ongoing principal professional development. So as I alluded to before, we have the undergirding of our policy and legislative efforts here. We've outlined a set of 8 recommendations that are evidence or research-based to help policymakers craft their legislative efforts going forward. And again, this is meant to provide lawmakers with the principal's perspective on how they can improve federal K-12 education policy to support school leaders. As we noted, the laws have generally overlooked principals, and we need to have a greater recognition of their roles and responsibility in K-12 laws, as well as requiring states and districts to do a better job of providing capacity building approaches through greater access to professional development opportunities, not only to help improve teachers, but principals in the support of teachers. So also we find that this movement towards growth and achievement needs to be bolstered, as well as the multiple recognition of the multiple ways in which students learn. And of course, we believe that any evaluation system should never be used to rank grade or uses a punitive measure against schools and educators. Going further, we are really taking a step in a new direction. Since the last Congress, NAESP jointly issued a report with our colleagues at the secondary level. Last year in September, we released the Rethinking Principal Evaluation report, which outlines what we believe and what principals really believe, paired with the research, what an effective system must entail. And those are largely linked to the domains of effective school leadership. In other words, they are the areas upon which a principal has direct control. We know that from our research and from the research effort that principals have there's an indirect correlation between the principalship and student achievement, second to teachers. So really we're making sure that lawmakers understand this dynamic and that they understand the context of schools needs to be considered as part of any fair, objective principal evaluation. The amount of time a principal has been in a building, that evaluation must be first and foremost directed to build the capacity of a principal and show how they can improve their performance to meet any state or local performance goals. It should not be punitive, and it certainly shouldn't omit any consideration of the contextual issues that you face. So fifth on our list includes holding principal preparation programs to high standards. We are really focused on looking at how our principals sufficiently armed, equipped with the right tools and knowledge once they enter into the workforce and finish the preparation program. So we're really looking in this new era of principal effectiveness, how principal preparation programs are faring, and holding them accountable to high standards. So our final set of policy principles, LES, include federal support for standards-based certification of induction and mentoring programs, especially for early career principals. We know that the first couple of years on the job is difficult, and there are ways to build very productive, efficient mentoring programs for principals, and we want to make sure there's a strong federal investment and recognition of those programs that work. Again, moving on to investing and identifying effective principals is an area where we think the federal government should do a better job of providing guidance, as well as the recognition of the preponderance of evidence of how much early childhood matters. It matters in terms of outcomes for kids in early grades, as well as moving them through the continuum onto college and career ready. So we are specifically looking for support for principals so that they themselves can benefit from programs that will help them create those continuums of learning from the early childhood space into elementary and early years. So all of the principles, LES, of our policy recommendations can be summed up going forward this year by two specific legislative priorities that we'll be talking with you more about. We continue to actually have updates by the minute on these two bills. It's fairly early in the session, so we've been working to introduce two key capstone type of pieces of legislation that will carry us through the reauthorization of ESEA for principals. The first is the reintroduction of the Principal Recruitment and Training Act. In previous Congresses, the bill has been introduced by Senator Franken and Congresswoman Susan Davis. That's Senator Franken from Minnesota, whom I'm sure many of you are familiar with, as well as Congresswoman Davis from California, who have committed to reintroducing the legislation, and we believe that will be happening next week and well in time for your visits on Capitol Hill. To complement the efforts to support the recruitment and training, which does include the mentoring, induction, preparation, and many of the areas that the 8 policy principles touch on. A separate piece or legislative push will be focused on the evaluation component. Right now, we're trying to work with both members of the House and Senate to introduce that piece of legislation. We'll be working with both committee staff, and we'll be asking you to take specific language to your members of Congress and asking for their support on this issue. So on to the March budget madness. Emily will be going ahead and filling you in.
Thanks, Kelly. So from the title, you can tell that your timing here in Washington, D.C. will be pretty apropos because there's quite a lot on the plate of Congress that's going to happen between now and when you're here in the end of March. As it says, there's a current funding bill that expires at the end of March. and it's expected that Congress will pass a budget extension to avoid a government shutdown on March 27th. So the problem is that since sequestration is scheduled to hit March 1st, after a 2-month delay that was just recently signed into law, that funding bill that could get us through the end of this current fiscal year may be an opportunity to kind of change some of the funding levels. So it'll be interesting to see and pay attention to what happens in the debate on that in both the Senate and House. Also happening in March will be pretty much the start of the FY14 appropriations process, but that whole process is somewhat delayed this year just due to all the fiscal uncertainties because of the constant negotiations around fiscal cliffs and debt ceilings and sequestration. So this year's funding levels haven't been figured out yet, but yeah, we're about to be in the midst of the FY14 budget, which isn't totally unique, as that's something that we've been facing for the past couple of years, that we kind of debate 2 fiscal year budgets at the same time. One other thing that is worth keeping in mind is that not only do we have sequestration, but already in law are the spending limits for the next decade, which reduces spending every year through 2021. So that not only squeezes funding available for current programs, it leaves not a lot of room for new investments. One thing that comes to mind would be the President's proposal for school safety measures, and so that is going to cost a little bit of money, and so there's going to be not a lot of room for Congress to appropriate money for that. The one other issue that happened last year, and it likely could happen again this year, is that the House may fund programs at lower levels of what the Senate will, and in doing so, it really creates this very complicated, basically, budget impasse, and so you can kind of see this continuing short-term budget deals happening in this next fiscal year as well, unfortunately. Some main points that we always advocate for is increased funding for Title I as well as IDEA. IDEA has never been fully funded. Currently, the federal share of the additional expenditures to serve students with special needs is about 17%, which the federal government has said that they would fund up to 40% of that additional expenditure, which has never happened. So that's something we always push for. And also, one thing that's definitely happened in recent years is that a lot of federal education programs have been consolidated or eliminated. The House pushed that very strongly last year, and actually in the past 2 years, over 50 federal education programs have been consolidated or eliminated. So it's definitely something that could be happening this year as well. The one thing to keep in mind, as I'm sure we all are on this call are very aware of, is that education funding has been hit pretty hard in recent years. We've been in a cycle of continual cuts. At the federal level, in the past 2 fiscal years, we've seen over about $1.5 billion cut from education investments. That's really hurt K-12 funding when you put that next to a lot of state budget shortfalls. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that it's kind of, I think, an important point to say on the Hill is that education funding, the discretionary part of education funding, is really only actually 2% of the total federal funding. As you can see by this chart, it's obviously a very small pot of money when you look at what's really driving the spending, which largely, as you can see, is Social Security, Medicare, these entitlement programs, and other mandatory programs. The discretionary spending is pretty low. So unfortunately, that's where a majority of the cuts at this point have come from. So the big thing that we have talked about last year, and we'll continue to talk about this year since it's kind of been in law for 2 years now, is this thing called sequestration. So hopefully everyone on this call is familiar with the basics of how sequestration will work. If not, just real fast, we're basically facing these automatic arbitrary across-the-board budget cuts for FY13. That's the current fiscal year, and that's what's scheduled to start on March 1st, following a 2-month delay. However, just a key point is that nearly all of the cuts to education programs wouldn't start until July 2013, so it would be the next school year, just the way education funding works. Most things are forward funded, so we wouldn't really feel the impact until the next school year, which unfortunately actually puts us at a little bit of a political disadvantage when advocating to avoid these cuts. So the other point to drive home is that while the across-the-board budget cuts is only going to be for FY13, sequestration is not a one-year issue. It's also, like I said, it caps the total spending levels for the next decade. So through 2021, we're going to see another $900 billion cut. So it really just shrinks the pot of money available. The one thing that's mentioned here also that's worth striving is that 50% of the cuts are coming from defense spending and 50% are coming from non-defense spending, which is where Department of Education sits, obviously. That's a really important firewall these days to protect education funding from even deeper, more harmful cuts. It has been a good protection for some members of Congress that want to protect perhaps defense spending more than other pots of money. So it's really critical that that remains in law. So just to recap from what we have talked about before, I know for folks that attended NLC, this shouldn't be new, but NLC last year, this shouldn't be new, but there's a few programs that are exempt, food stamps, child health insurance program, Pell Grants for just the first year. But basically what this all means is that current estimates of these cuts would be 5.1%, which would be about $3 billion, just under $3 billion from the Department of Education. Now, because of that 2-month delay, the cuts will be reduced slightly, but they'll also will now be taken over fewer months. So the aggregate monthly cut may be the same, but the total cut will be less. And an important point is that with sequestration, the fiscal year 2013 funding would be below FY 2004 funding levels, which is pretty incredible considering our increased enrollment and increase in student needs. So how can we reduce the impact of these cuts? It's pretty important that you share with your members of Congress what this means in your communities. How is this going to impact your schools? We have strongly advocated now since this became law that Congress really needs to take a balanced deficit reduction approach to reduce these cuts, which means basically that you can't continue to cut discretionary spending, which at this point has been where most of the cuts have come from, unfortunately. Revenues have to be on the table. Just this week, the President has called on Congress to reduce these cuts and asked that they also include revenues. So there are some efforts on Congress to eliminate these cuts. It seems every week there's a different thought about is it going to happen or is it not going to happen, but you have to, frankly, at this point, because we're so close to these cuts taking effect, you have to have kind of a backup plan that it is very likely that it could happen. Of course, as Congress likes to wait till 11th hour for most things, this could definitely change. I think one of the strongest messages you can have about why these cuts shouldn't take effect is that, obviously, as we all know, education investments really help improve the nation's economy. One striking figure is that since the recession began in early 2008, local education jobs have been cut by nearly 360,000, which means that's a lot of K-12, higher ed, education jobs that have been lost, and that unfortunately every month that number seems to be growing. The other point is that with a bachelor's degree you earn about 3 times the amount as you would without a high school diploma. So that on top of the fact that child poverty levels are at record high levels currently, you know, this really drives the message home that education can't afford to be cut even more.
So we've been asking you to type in your questions, and mostly want to let you know that first, yes, this webinar presentation will be archived on the NAESP website. It will can be found under the Advocacy National Leaders Conference NLC tab on the menu. We will, as we get closer to NLC, be sending around additional materials, talking points, and information for you as you prepare to come to Washington and meet with your members of Congress. We want to reiterate that we're here to help you. If you're having an issue contacting an office or getting a meeting scheduled, you can contact either Emily or I to help with that. We can also help you identify who the right staffer is, and who what we can be doing to support you. We're here for that. So a couple of last minute points as well. Here are some things we're going to be suggesting that you ask. First and foremost, when you go into a member of Congress's office, you have to ask for something. They want to know why you're there. It's perfectly fine to tell them what you believe and what your approach and philosophy is on their work and how they can help support your role, but you need to ask them what they can do for you before you walk out of the office. And we're giving you plenty of things to talk about and ask for. So we'll be boiling all of this down into a couple of brief talking points. But first and foremost, it will be to support the legislation that NAESP has been working to put forward. And that is the Principal Recruitment and Training Act, and then a separate piece which will likely come to fruition soon on evaluation. So again, members of Congress and staff like to hear from you, but they want to know more about your schools and the schools and students in their districts and states. So be prepared to go in and talk about your context, the kids that you serve, your schools, your teachers, your communities. Share your wonderful success stories, and that means how are you making it work despite the overabundance of policy and regulation we have in education nowadays. Principals are incredibly nimble and flexible and have figured out how to make it work. While they want to hear about the issues and concerns that you'll be bringing forward, it's important to show them how we are working, why schools are doing wonderful, terrific things with children who are succeeding and making it. So we want you to share those stories as well.
Just a few last reminders about congressional visits is that feel free to be a resource to your members of Congress and their staff and answer any questions. But if you really don't know the answers, feel free to say that someone from any ESP advocacy team will follow up. We're happy to do that. Let us know what needs to happen and who had the questions, and we will definitely do that. If you haven't done this, it's always a great idea to invite your member, your elected official, and staff to your school. There's a lot of district work periods where they will be in your community, so it's a really great time to have them see what's so great about your school. And finally, the personal connection is really important when you're trying to maintain a relationship with your member of Congress. So send an email and send a actual thank you through the mail. They will get it, and we're happy to help you with that if you need. Finally, like we said, we're going to provide additional materials for you to prepare in preparation or before the conference, but we're also going to have material available for you to leave with the staff and members of Congress that you meet with. We'll have those like we have in past years. If you're not familiar with the Capitol complex, it's large, and you likely will be moving between the House side and Senate side, so wear comfortable shoes, and it's February. It's cold here, so just come prepared.
And be ready to stand in lines at security. So we just want to make sure that everyone's aware, especially this time of the year, since we are in session, you'll likely encounter a little line. Any questions for now? Again, expect more information from us. We're going to look at a couple questions right now before we hop off the line. Again, yes, this PowerPoint is going to be on the website.
It is currently on the website.
So you can go to naesp.org and look under the National Advocacy National Leaders Conference tab and find this presentation. And just looking at some of your thoughts, well, yes, just as a reminder, February 26th is the day to schedule your Hill meetings. We have some programming on that Monday, the 25th, which is shaping up to be very exciting and engaging. We promise it's not going to be just Emily and I going on about policy and federal budgets, statistics, and status. We have some exciting guests that will be speaking, including a representative from the White House and some from the policy and actually the literary community. So we're excited to host them. We'll be doing some membership programming as well. Some of the other questions that we'll just address quickly about federal funding, we're going to go into more details in our talking points about the sequester and what exactly we'll be asking you to say. But in the meantime, we encourage you to review this website or this webinar presentation. In our website, we have a budget resource page under key issues in the advocacy tab. You can go there. It looks like we are just a minute over our running presentation time. So we will be back in touch with you. We look forward to hosting you. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact myself, Kelly Pollitt, or Emily Rolfs, and we'd be happy to assist. So we'll see you soon, and we hope all of you are staying warm. Take care.